Hello, this is Simon Brew. I'm the founder of Film Stories magazine, and a very warm welcome to the Film Stories podcast.
Sorry about that. I literally had to fly in from outer space.
Come with me.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And movies that had stories.
The story just sucks them in.
This is just the beginning.
Stories. We would be honored if you would join us.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to Film Stories with Simon Brew. I am Simon Brew, as always, absolutely everything you need to know about me. The aim of the podcast? Well, given away by the title. I'm here to talk of the stories of film, and I tend to talk about production stories, marketing stories, release stories, distribution stories, all the ingredients, really, that go towards making the films that we know and sometimes love. Just that, the films that we know and sometimes love. The films I tend to cover on this podcast lean more towards the mainstream than anything else. They're films I'm interested in or invested in to some degree. I try not to do snark. I try not to punch down. This podcast is a celebration of cinema and a real appreciation that somehow films manage to get made. Film Stories, as always, is a very proud part of the Film Stories podcast network, a network of over 40 shows across films, TV, gaming, lots more coming this year as well. Just do a search, Film Stories podcast network. Hopefully you'll find some things in there, some other things to entertain your eardrums. As for this show, each regular episode, I dig into the behind-the-scenes stories of two movies, and, well, it's a regular episode, so let's crack on with that. The first of the two films is one that's been demanded by a couple of people over the years. I promised them I'd get to it. Now it's time. Let me play you a clip. I'm going to come to the story of our first film just after this.
The other kids make fun of him because of how young he looks. Nobody includes him. They call him the narc behind his back.
They do?
One day, you'll be cool.
So you're the kid who's been sending me those articles from the school newspaper. What, do you like the star of your school?
They hate me.
This is Rolling Stone magazine.
We got a couple copies of your stories.
I think you should be writing for us.
We can only pay, let me see, $700. I'll write $1,000.
Does anybody remember laughter?
I'd like to interview you or somebody from your band.
Oh, The Enemy, a rock writer.
It won an Oscar. It was Roger Ebert's Film of the Year. It's revered decades on. It's a much-loved movie. It was a box office flop. Let's get into the story of 2000's Almost Famous. Almost Famous is a film, as many of you know, written and directed by Cameron Crowe, with a cast including, deep breath, Patrick Fugit, Billy Crudup, Frances McDormand, Kate Hudson, Jason Lee, Anna Paquin, Fairuza Balk, Noah Taylor, Philip Seymour Hoffman. It's a hell of an ensemble for a hell of a film, really. And at the end of last year, I dug out my 4K disc of Almost Famous, which has sat in shrink wrap for a painfully and embarrassingly long amount of time. I went back to it for the first time it must be about a decade or so, and pressed play, but inadvertently put the longer cut on. I was expecting the theatrical cut, and 3 hours of my life, nearly 3 hours of my life, just pretty much melted away. Also, towards the end of last year, I read Cameron Crowe's memoir, The Uncool. Now, this is a really terrific book. I highly recommend it. But also, you put it side by side with Almost Famous, and you become very aware they're doing similar jobs. So, this story is all about Cameron Crowe. That as a filmmaker, he'd broken through with some style. You look at his filmmaking CV. Fast Times at Ridgemont High is the first thing he wrote that's produced. He wrote The Wildlife. 1989, he writes and directs Say Anything. 92, he writes, directs, produces singles. And then he absolutely hits pay dirt with 1996's Jerry Maguire, a massive box office hit, an Oscar winner, the kind of thing that puts you right near the top of the Hollywood tree. Now, in tandem with this, around the same time Jerry Maguire was spiking, Steven Spielberg, David Geffen, and Jeffrey Katzenberg, three Hollywood figures, had gone off to, for assorted reasons, they'd pulled their funds to launch Hollywood's first big new studio in a generation. This was called DreamWorks SKG. And the right studio turned up at the right time for the right filmmaker, basically. Let's go even further back into Cameron Crowe's life, because, and The Uncool does a great job of telling you these stories. When he was just 15 years old, he took his love of music and his love of writing and broke into rock journalism. And by 16 years old, the age of 16, he was making a living on the staff of Rolling Stone magazine, where he then worked for a while. He was following bands on tour. He was writing features. He was interviewing artists and putting some fairly testy questions in their direction. And then over time, as he migrated to film, he looked to bring these two worlds together. And he explained, I wanted to find a way to tell a story that captured the people I'll never forget and the feelings I had meeting the bands, doing interviews, going to see shows. But then also, as he kind of pondered what this story would be, he added that I didn't want it to be like some of those semi-autobiographical stories that glorify the writer, because the truth is, I never felt the centre of any room I was in at the time. I was an observer. And so he directed effectively his life story with changes into a character called William Miller. And he posited William Miller as an observer, really, in the film, that he's the central character. But as you'll see, if you're familiar with the film, if you've not, do go and watch it. It really is great. He's on the side of the rooms for a lot of it. And so he set about writing it, William obviously standing in for him, and with the view that this character was basically the front row at the circus, and the film had to be seen through his eyes. Now, there are a couple of different drafts. There was a draft actually called Ricky Fedora. Let's go with Ricky Fedora, which had a role for David Bowie in it at one point. That, for whatever reason, didn't pan out. There was an early version of the script called The Journalist as well. But as soon, I mean, off the back of Jerry Maguire, I've just been listening to James L. Brooks do an interview with Simon Mayo on the Kermode and Mayo's Tape podcast. And Simon Mayo asked James L. Brooks about, after winning an Oscar for your first film and having so much success, what does it get you? And a Hollywood producer said, you get to make 2 more films. So off the back of Jerry Maguire, I'm not sure it stood at that point, like the mid going into the back end of the 1990s, you get 2 more films. You'd certainly get a bit of space to make the film that you wanted. People wanted to work with Cameron Crowe. There was DreamWorks, an artist-friendly studio, and a deal was struck that DreamWorks would back this next Cameron Crowe project. Problem was, well, then you've got to find the ensemble for this. Then you've got to make it. And I mean, hindsight is easy, right? But it was a risky film. So the casting director tasked with finding the actor to fill the shoes of the character of William Miller was someone called Gail Levin. And she took months. I mean, this role was cast very late in the day, actually. They were looking for an unknown, and they did loads of face-to-face interviews. They did taped auditions as well, people sending in tapes from all around America. And it was this, I mean, Joseph Gordon-Levitt got close to the role, apparently, but was seen as a little bit too old. That, as Cameron Crowe would reflect, if you look at the kid in Jerry Maguire, if you cast a kid the same age as the character, you get unexpected benefits of that, and it kind of leaned him a little bit away from Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Patrick Fugit, meanwhile, in Utah, put himself on tape, and they watched the tape, and it basically brought the search pretty much to an end. He was then flown out to meet Cameron Crowe. Now, the thing is, Patrick Fugit was in Utah. He was an absolute outsider to Hollywood. And, I mean, as Cameron Crowe would say, Patrick had never even been to Los Angeles before. And you could see he was taking it all in. And he conveyed that feeling of being a fan. And I immediately felt we were close to something. I think I knew we could make this movie when I met him. Well, they were already down the road of making the movie. But let's just focus on Patrick Fugit for a minute, because here he was about to headline a big Hollywood production. This was not going to be a cheap film. And I mean, he admitted he was terrified. He was awestruck by it all as well. And I mean, he was set a lot of music homework, you'll be surprised here, by Cameron Crowe to get him into the role. I mean, the guy hadn't even been born in 1973 when the film was going to be set. He had no recollection of the music of that era, heard the odd song here and there. But Cameron Crowe prescribed a bunch of albums from people like Led Zeppelin, The Who, Neil Young. I think he got close to a role in the film as well. David Bowie, Peter Frampton. And Crowe told his young star, I want this stuff coming out of your pores. And so Patrick Fugit listened to the music, listened to these albums pretty much on loop, listened to it religiously. And now, I mean, he's a huge fan of it. Then he was exploring and finding it for the first time. Now, one of the absolute flybys on the casting of Almost Famous was Brad Pitt. Now, the casting of Brad Pitt in the film, in the key role of Russell, this made DreamWorks happy. Now they had basically a movie star in the film. And so Sarah Polley was set to play the role of Penny. Kate Hudson came in an audition. She was going to be the older sister, Anita. But then there were casting changes. Sarah Polley dropped out. She's done interviews about this. She's gone on to direct a couple of terrific films as well. But Brad Pitt had put 4 months in working with Cameron Crowe to develop his character. And in fact, when Patrick Fugit was cast for the first time, Brad Pitt was still on board. And Fugit would tell Uproxx, I went in and Cameron introduced me to Brad. He was sitting in Cameron's office. Brad could tell I was nervous, but I was excited to get into things. So broke the ice by talking about PlayStation. And they talked about other stuff for about 15, 20 minutes before they got into it. But after 4 months, Brad Pitt decided this wasn't for him. He wasn't going to carry on. And Cameron Crowe has been open about the fact that he, quote, wept when he got... There's a podcast, Origins, which went into Almost Famous. And it's on there that Crowe it was an absolute hammer blow. But he did say, I knew that he'd never fully fallen in love with the character. He'd fallen in love with the idea of the character. But maybe there just wasn't enough on the page, as we're going to find out. There were a lot of pages as well. There had been rumours at the time that it was to do with money, but Cameron Crowe, again, told that Origins podcast, he was as much inclined to think it was to do with the age difference between a couple of the characters that kind of unnerved Brad Pitt a little bit, maybe, don't know. Brad Pitt's never talked about this. Was it a combination of money, that age difference, just something not gelling? Didn't matter in the end. He was out of the film. And, it wasn't the only casting flyby either. I mean, Meryl Streep was in the running for the role that eventually went to the brilliant double Oscar winner Frances McDormand. Natalie Portman was in the running for the role of Penny Lane. Jack Black auditioned for a key role of a supporting character, Lester Bangs, absolutely pivotal to both the book and the story. Kate Hudson had come in and auditioned, been cast in a completely different role. And so there was just this gap now with the character of Russell. Because, because Cameron Crowe carried this weight over from Jerry Maguire, he had the latitude that he didn't have to replace Brad Pitt with a movie star. And in the end, it was Billy Crudup and Jason Lee who were cast as the bandmates in the group Stillwater that we see in the film. Then Cameron Crowe brought in a proper music star, Peter Frampton, who schooled them on basically being a 1970s rock band. And as Frampton said, coming into the film, Billy knew how to hold a guitar. He could play a few chords and he could do some fingering, steady, very basic stuff. But he also said, we didn't have a lot of time before shooting, so I wasn't able to teach him the A, B, C, D, E's of guitar all the way through to Z. We sort of went A, D, K. But Frampton said he was such a willing pupil, it became almost an intuitive thing. He was jamming with the band incredibly fast. He said it was amazing. What thrills me the most is that Billy picked up the guitar for the role, but hasn't put it down. And in fact, hasn't put it down. But still, weeks and weeks of rehearsal, all the time they're rehearsing, Jason Lee's letting his hair grow as well. In terms of the filmmaking as well, Cameron Crowe made a key hire. He brought in John Toll to be the director of photography, an experienced DP. The 1970s very much his oxygen. And as Crowe said, the man's a genius. He said, before we began filming, I talked to him about how I remembered the 70s, the feeling I wanted to capture. John Toll took this in, worked on the look. And as Cameron Crowe said, the movie doesn't feel like someone's golden hazed memory. He really wanted to avoid that. It feels like it's happening right now. And the choice they made fairly early on was, for a lot of the film, what you're going to have steady cams working, and you're going to have moments where you follow characters around. A lot of the time, in just like capturing that I'm an observer from the front row, they would use a static camera, which would put a lot more emphasis on the actors having to do the work. The camera would be still, and you would have this fixed position, observing what was going on. The green light got given with a 172-page screenplay. Now, the rule of thumb of a screenplay is 1 minute of screenplay is 1 minute of screen time. It's only a rough rule of thumb, but it's not a bad one. And Cameron Crowe would reflect many years later, 20 years on actually, to Rolling Stone about how the film got the green light. And he admitted it was basically a freebie because of Jerry Maguire. And Steven Spielberg talked to Cameron Crowe and just said to him, shoot every word. And then he said, when we lost Brad Pitt, there was no pressure to find this other star. Spielberg instead said to him, the script is the star. And so, May 1999, the filming begins on Almost Famous. It was going to be a long shoot. It was going to be a hell of a road trip as well for basically 3 months. The cast and crew travelling around, getting their shots. A band on tour, really. There was a challenge to a degree for Cameron Crowe that he had to face of separating out the character of William from the person he was, let's just say, loosely based on. But then there was also capturing the concert footage as well, because, the band Stillwater had to look convincing. And in fact, the first concert scene was shot at the San Diego Sports Arena. They brought in a couple of hundred extras. And then it was the band go out to play in front of them. And as Cameron Crowe said, it was a miracle to me that the band found their voice so quickly. It was really important as well, because he said going into the film, my biggest fear was they would look like a movie band. But I think they captured a feeling of a real band in that era. They looked and sounded like a genuine journeyman American band trying to make it to the next level. And I was actually sorry that these guys would go in 4 different directions when our movie wrapped, because I want to see them play again. And they did a couple of concert scenes, one point in front of 1,500 people, and they really, they've admitted, I think Billy Crudup and Jason Lee have both said, when they heard the noise of the crowd, they really got into it. You don't get that as a movie actor; you get it as a theatre actor. The interaction with the audience. Here, they were getting electricity off it. Kate Hudson gave an interview where she said, I was in the crowd. We just really got into it. It almost didn't feel like a film shoot, really, because Kate Hudson, by this stage, had been cast when Sarah Polley dropped out in that role of Penny Lane. That she was originally in a different part in the picture because of the casting jiggling around. Now she was effectively the female lead in it, and it would be a star-making performance for her, and rightly so as well. Now, the shoot went on for, and it went on its travels, but it went on for a long time. A 92-day shoot, almost unheard of as we're recording now in 2026. And the 100-day club of film shoots, it feels almost relegated to the past. Now you need to be shooting 3 films back to back to get past 100 days. For a film like this, not a massive blockbuster, to do 92 days was a lot. And in fact, the Los Angeles Times would report that it basically gone around a month over schedule. It also said the budget had gone over, that it was up to $15 million over budget in the end. I can't find anything to back that up. The final budget is quoted at $60 million, which is a lot for a non-movie star driven, effectively a drama, really, isn't it? And so, it was a hefty investment from DreamWorks. DreamWorks was also paying to house Cameron Crowe's production company as well. I think it housed it on its lot for 3 years. And so it was a hefty investment in the filmmaker and the film. Vinyl Films is Cameron Crowe's production company. They had, even though the shoot was long, I mean, someone like Philip Seymour Hoffman, they could only have him for 4 days, and he had a bad cold when he came in as well. The other restriction was to do with its star. Patrick Fugit was 16 when the film was being shot, and so the working laws meant there were only so many hours he could do a day. That also took the shoot over schedule, and over the course of 3 months as well. There was another practical problem too. Patrick Fugit grew by 3 inches, and so his costume had to be continually refitted. And by the end, Billy Crudup was having to wear platform shoes. Fugit's voice altered slightly over the shoot as well. So all these little challenges just across a 92-day production. Crowe was shooting lots of film as well. He was really keen on getting the detail right, recreating the old Rolling Stone offices in San Francisco. You look at the crowd scenes, and all the extras are in absolutely the right costumes. And I mean, he knew he was lucky, and he told Entertainment Weekly this an anecdote about after shooting the first scene with Philip Seymour Hoffman as Lester Bangs, he called up David Geffen, one of the 3 presidents of DreamWorks SKG. He was the G. And just basically said, thank you for letting me make this movie. I can't believe I'm getting to make it. And Crowe said, I just got him on the phone and said, I'm really, really happy we're making this movie. I can't believe what brought me to this day where I can film Philip Seymour Hoffman as Lester Bangs. And David Geffen goes, Jerry Maguire is what brought you here. I have to go. And he hung up. October 1999, then the film goes, the film wraps and goes into post-production, and the theatrical cut of the film came in the end at 122 minutes. There is a longer version of this. It's not called a director's cut per se, but there is an extended edition of the movie that came out. But still, it was due, it was going to debut at the Toronto International Film Festival September the 8th, 2000, and then it would be released widely it would be released in the United States, not widely initially, on September the 15th. Cameron Crowe threw himself into the publicity for it, did lots of interviews. Also, the budget for the film was slightly inflated by just the sheer size of the soundtrack for the movie. I think there's around 50 songs in Almost Famous. The usual cost of putting songs in a movie, $1 million, $1.5 million. This was $3.5 million on the budget to get the music. Even then, they couldn't get every track that they wanted. And weeks before the film was coming out, DreamWorks was having a bit of a wobble over it. I mean, it wasn't having a bad year. This was the year of Gladiator, but it was having a wobble, and so it decided to package a deal with Sony. This would be a deal that affected 3 films, selling the overseas rights to them. This was weeks before the release of Almost Famous. As such, Sony ponied up $100 million that gave it a 50-50 split on Almost Famous and overseas rights to Evolution. Remember that? Directed by Ivan Reitman, starring David Duchovny, and Barry Levinson's film An Everlasting Peace. Still, DreamWorks, I mean, their initial release treated this as a kind of awards release, which to a degree it was, but also it cost $60 million to make. And so it held just over 400 word-of-mouth taster screenings around the US, and decided it was going to roll the film out really slowly to try and get an audience. And then the word of mouth gathered, just gathers speed, gathers momentum, and then you get an Oscar run and a box office hit. That's like generally how it was expected to work. So we go to that opening weekend, which is September the 15th to the 17th, the weekend of the Sydney Olympics taking place. And Almost Famous opens up on 131 screens in the US in 8th place. That's 131 screens, 8th place, $2.3 million, and a really, really strong screen average of $17,669. By context, the number 1 film that week was The Watcher, which led to legal shenanigans, I think, over the way Keanu Reeves' role was beefed up in the advertising for that. That grossed $5.8 million for number one slot on 2,700 screens. I mean, the screen average for Almost Famous was comfortably the highest in the chart that week, and the reviews for the film were really, really, really strong as well. The critical response was just, I mean, Roger Ebert, again, I said at the start, he named it his film of the year. He wasn't alone in giving it really, really, really strong critical response. I mean, a couple of naysayers, really, but not that many. I mean, Cameron Crowe had delivered the film he wanted. It had got a terrific response from critics. And that early week one release looked really positive for word of mouth to keep building. And so it was fingers crossed. Will it keep building? Well, the second week, DreamWorks upped the screen count in the US to just over 1,000, and the film's up to number 3 at the box office, 6.9 million, topping the chart. Urban Legends Final Cut, 8.5 million. A re-release, well, The Exorcist 2000 Director's Cut, 8.1 million. But Almost Famous, Bring It On in the top 10, The Watcher, Bait, remember Bait? Nurse Betty's a really good film. What Lies Beneath, Space Cowboys, Woman on Top. I mean, nothing was smashing things up in the top 10 that week, but Almost Famous looked like it had a good run ahead of it. Its third week, the screen count inches up a bit, but hang on, the box office returns are going down. So now, week 3, 5.5 million, but on more screens, and the alarm bells are starting to ring. Remember, The Titans opens in top place with $20.9 million. Almost Famous still in third, but Meet the Parents comes out the following week. The remake of Get Carter, what a film. Digimon the movie. I mean, it looks like the film is running out of fuel already. The following week, it's down to 9th place. This isn't displaying the behaviour of an Oscar winner. Films like Lost Souls and The Ladies' Man, The Contender. That's not a bad film. Dr. T. I mean, it's out of the top 10 by week 6. And its screen count is starting to drop, and there's just this feeling that it ain't really catching on. The reason? It ain't really catching on. I mean, in the US, by the end of its box office run, Almost Famous did what was seen as a puzzling $32.5 million. It had cost $60 million to make. It would only add just under $15 million outside the US. Box office gross worldwide, $47.3 million. I mean, that's, at the point of release, a box office flop. And much the eventual film story of Almost Famous, in the end, revolved around people trying to diagnose quite what had gone wrong. A Los Angeles Times piece in October 2000 was just really puzzled by it. I mean, its opening was, quote, seeing Cameron Crowe's entertaining ode to his days as a 1970s teen rock journalist, you'd think hit, and a profitable one, because with no stars, it certainly couldn't have cost much. Neither's turning out to be true. The Los Angeles Times wrote that one of the best reviewed movies of the year, Almost Famous, has failed to find an audience. Worse, the coming-of-age drama cost more than $60 million to produce, and then marketing distribution on top of that. And there was, I don't know, a little bit of grumbling in that Los Angeles, speculating. Let's go with speculating in that Los Angeles Times article that Cameron Crowe and DreamWorks weren't particularly thrilled with each other. To quote the piece, relations between the writer, director, producer and DreamWorks SKG, sources say, are strained. Crowe is questioning whether the studio could have done and spent more to sell his movie. DreamWorks, for its part, was said to be unhappy that Cameron Crowe had already set his next film and set it at Paramount, not at DreamWorks. He was going to go on to reunite with Tom Cruise on Vanilla Sky, and DreamWorks felt they'd really supported Almost Famous. And then when the Tom Cruise movie comes along, Cameron Crowe had gone elsewhere. Again, it's all tittle-tattle. We're not in the midst of all of this, and it's a bit of tabloid gossip. All sides hoped that come Oscar season, though, Almost Famous would get its rewards. And, well, acclaim certainly went its way. But the nominations were, in the end, a little bit on the light side, really. That it wasn't that Almost Famous didn't interest the American Academy. But that particular year, the 73rd Academy Awards, it got nominated for 4 Oscars. DreamWorks, meanwhile, its attention was on its bigger hope, Gladiator, which was picking up nominations left, right, and centre and looked like a surer bet. Meanwhile, Almost Famous picks up 2 Best Supporting Actress nominations for Kate Hudson and Frances McDormand. Straight away, you've split the vote. Go back to when Thelma and Louise came out. Gina Davis, Susan Sarandon, both nominated for Best Actress. Split the vote. Neither's going to win. The film editing from Saar Klein and Joe Hutchin, that was nominated. And Cameron Crowe's screenplay was nominated. And he'd win. He would win for that. One solitary Oscar, though, wasn't in the Best Picture running. Almost Famous was kind of fizzling out a little bit. And ordinarily, that would be that. However, 20 years on, the film is revered. The longer cut of the film has come out and is preferred by fans of it, really. And it's substantially longer. I mean, it edges towards 3 hours, the longer cut, and it's really, really, really good. Also, I mean, you look at some of the ramifications from it. A stage musical debuted in San Diego in 2019, went to Broadway. Just take one song from the film, Elton John's song, Tiny Dancer, which wasn't really that popular in 2000. It wasn't a big hit, but it fit the film. And Elton John saw the film and just said, I've always loved Tiny Dancer. It means a lot to me it's included. And then as Tiny Dancer gets more and more famous over the years, Elton John keeps giving Almost Famous credit for it. Cameron Crowe would go on to do Vanilla Sky, but he keeps getting asked about Almost Famous. He's just written The Uncle, which is effectively the story told again from a different perspective. And it's a great film. And he would reflect to Entertainment Weekly many years later that even though he'd already found success as a director, he felt he was sort of playing a role in it. He said, I think we all stepped into our characters. My character is this distressed guy trying to make a decent movie out of my actual childhood. Completely stressful, but what I got a lot of joy over and still do is showing Patrick how much fun it is to make a movie. Almost Famous continues to get re-releases, continues to get screenings. Vanilla Sky would follow in 2001. Since then, I mean, Cameron Crowe's work done Elizabethtown, the underrated We Bought a Zoo as well, a lower. Nothing really that high profile and that high budget, which is a shame. Hopefully there's something else somewhere along the lines. But if nothing else, I recommend this double bill combination of the extended cut of Almost Famous and the book, The Uncool. Terrific stories. Really, really well told. Both of them just deserve more success. And that brings me to the halfway point of this episode of Film Stories. As always, thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. It's parish notices time. I've not done this for a little while. So, firstly, if you like this podcast, my usual favour, please hit the subscribe button wherever you have subscribe buttons. I don't know. Please leave ideally a hugely positive review. And if you want to help support us financially, if you go to patreon.com/Simon Brew, put some coins in the pot there. You get the podcast early, pretty much every time. You get it ad-free every time. You find out what we're up to behind the scenes. You get the access to our message boards as well. And you get eternal thanks. Yeah, okay. We also have print film magazines. So there's a UK film coming into cinemas just as this podcast is being released. The film Giant has started playing in UK cinemas. We've got a huge exclusive in our print magazine on that very film. If you go to store.filmstories.co.uk, that's where you'll find the latest issues of Film Stories and Film Junior magazines. Thank you to everybody who supports our commitment to print. It is much, much appreciated. Then I have a live event coming up in Birmingham Birmingham in the UK, not Alabama, sorry, on the 16th of January 2026. We've changed year, 2026. I've got Ben Wheatley coming for a Q&A after his latest film. If you go to macbirmingham.co.uk, just do a search for Film Stories or Ben Wheatley on there. You'll find tickets, and he's always good value. I think that's the end of my parish notices, though. Shall I get on with the second of the two films? That's a good idea. Right, I'm talking to myself. It's getting worse, folks. I do apologise. Let me set things up with a clip from the trailer. Get your cell phones ready. Come to the story, The Other Side of This.
Tell me what I need to know.
I don't know what you're talking about.
You're never gonna see your son again.
You got the wrong family!
This is the single greatest phone ever made. Hold on a second, I'm emailing this video to myself. Hello?
Hello? Can you hear me? I need your help.
Who is this, Chloe?
No. My name is Jessica Martin. I've been kidnapped. The phone I'm talking on, it's destroyed. If you hang up, I'd be able to get anybody else. Oh my God. Someone's coming.
I'm gonna die here.
No!
Oh God. Oh God. We had a report of a possible kidnapping.
Anybody here? Police?
I know if you do movie shows and podcasts and things like that, you're supposed to talk about the Steven Spielbergs, the Martin Scorseses, people like that, and I do. However, there are directors who fly under people's radars who have delivered a lot of fun movies. And this story is just a slice of one of those. The late David R. Ellis, and a film by the name of Cellular. Now, this starts with a B-movie icon, Larry Cohen, who I look into. We lost him in 2019. There's been a good book or two written about him. Responsible for a chunk of B-movies, but then he hit gold with screenwriting fairly later on in his life. So he wrote the thriller Phone Booth. Remember this one? It was doing the rounds for decades in Hollywood before it was made. For a while, it was going to be made with Jim Carrey in the lead role when Jim Carrey was first looking at veering towards something dramatic. In the end, it was shot with Colin Farrell, with Joel Schumacher directing and Kiefer Sutherland doing a very, very heavy voiceover on it. But the idea of Phone Booth was there's a man pinned to a phone. The main character can't move. Fairly cheap film to make, fairly contained, proper Hitchcocky stuff. And, you know, that in the end got over the line. I don't think it was a great film. Some people do. Fair enough. But there was another film along the same lines that Larry Cohen also imagined. Now, this too had been around for a long time. I mean, Cohen was talking to Hitchcock in the 1960s about his phone-based thriller ideas, although it wasn't cellular, mobile phones at that point. But in the 1990s, it really came to prominence, this other Larry Cohen script. And this was about one of those newfangled mobile phone things that were starting to do the rounds. Remember them? Never take off. It's a film. It's a surprise. It's a film that works through contemporary eyes as well. I say that talking about it 2 decades after it came out, but it found like the nascent cell phone technology. I mean, and it's a very specific moment in time where it was made, written, done. You can tell that when a mobile store is held up at gunpoint to get a very specific phone charger before all the standards of those are unified, things like that. But basically, the idea had been around Hollywood. It was known. And he penned it after Phone Booth, thinking this would actually be the inverse. This time, there's a phone involved, but the main character's moving around. It was friends of his who just said, basically, isn't that the same thing? It landed in the end on the desk of someone called Lauren Lloyd. Now, she at the time was an executive vice president working at Sony Pictures, and she really liked this, but she didn't have the power to greenlight it herself. So all she could do was take it to her colleagues, see if she could convince them to back it, see if she could loosen the Sony purse strings to get it going, and couldn't. No joy at all, and despite her best efforts. But it did stick with her. And I mean, she talked about it. She said, when I first read the script, it was about a guy who wasn't very heroic. He was a driver for a bank robbery, and the woman wasn't really kidnapped. But the script evolved, and it was a single idea of staying on a cell phone when someone's life is in danger and being unable to hang up. And Lauren Lloyd said it just seemed so visceral and immediate that I loved the script. Now, her time at Sony came to an end shortly afterwards, and she decided to set up as an independent producer instead. And Cellular was a script that she just remembered. And so she went out and acquired it. And I read that it was acquired in the end in 1999 for a price of $750,000. Larry Cohen was going through a bit of a purple patch here as well. I mean, he had another phone story. As he told screenwriters Utopia, I have a third film like this called Message Deleted, which is a thriller centered on an answering machine. That one never happened. Wouldn't work now, would it? But in 1999, the rights to Cellular were sold. Phone Booth hadn't been made at this point, but it was around the time Joel Schumacher, Jim Carrey were potentially circling. But going back to Cellular, what a friend of Lauren Lloyd's was a man called Dean Devlin. You know Dean Devlin, the original, the credited director of a film called Geostorm. I've heard of that. I like that. But, I mean, looking like through where are we now? The early 2000s. Through that lens, the writer and producer of Stargate, Independence Day, Universal Soldier, known for his collaborations with Roland Emmerich and big booming blockbusters of that scale. He and Emmerich were going their separate ways at this point. Lauren Lloyd approaches Dean Devlin. Are you interested in working together on this? Devlin takes a look. Yeah, they decide to pull their resources and work on bringing Cellular to the screen together. They didn't think it was ready, though. They thought it needed a bit of script work. And so they went on the lookout for a new screenwriter to take a pass at it. Enter an upcoming young screenwriter at that point called Chris Morgan. Chris Morgan is now known for the endless list of Fast and Furious films that have come out over the years. But the Chris Morgan who was hired at the start of the 2000s, well, Cellular is actually his first credited film. He would join the Fast and Furious franchise afterwards, writing Tokyo Drift, and then he's been involved with pretty much every Fast and Furious since. Gone on to write or co-write things like Wanted, 47 Ronin, Bird Box, remember that? Shazam, Fury of the Gods, that was him. Red One, that was him as well. But this was his first big credit, really. And so this young up-and-coming writer, and he liked this idea of a hero story where it's not a regular hero. He liked, he wanted to put a bit more humour in it. In fact, he would say, I'm a big fan of situational humour. And I feel like comedy plays best when it's the right thing at the right time and not just somebody trying to make a joke. His argument was, and his template really, is in Raiders of the Lost Ark. You remember that bit where Indiana Jones, played by Harrison Ford, is faced with the swordsman doing all the tricks and blah, blah, blah. Indiana Jones pulls out a gun, shoots him. Not really a joke, but as Chris Morgan said, it got a huge laugh, and that's the kind of humour we tried to get to work. So he reworks the script, and now this was a draft that the producers could do business with. Lauren Lloyd, Dean Devlin, they liked what they read. Just like, okay, this could be a fairly modestly costed production. We just need someone to direct it. So Dean Devlin at this point was considering directing features. He wouldn't direct for the first time actually until 2017 in the end. He'd done like bits and bobs. He would do bits and bobs on television before that, things like Leverage and The Librarians he'd direct episodes of. But it was 2017's Geostorm and 2018's Bad Samaritan that would be his first venturing into directing. There was just that brief moment where it was possible he could direct Cellular, but turned out not to be. Instead, they had a look round, and David R. Ellis had put himself on radar. I mean, first of all, he built himself a career as a stunt performer first, then an assistant director on a load of high-profile films. I mean, his filmography, incredible, really, that he was on stuff like Fatal Attraction. He was on Patriot Games. You remember Christian Slater in Cuffs, Forever Young, Body of Evidence, Sliver, Made in America, Beethoven's Second, Waterworld. He worked on that. Sphere, The Negotiator, Soldier, Deep Blue Sea, The Perfect Storm, Harry Potter, the first one, The Matrix Reloaded, Master and Commander. I mean, it's a long list of films that he was involved with, working his way up to like the assistant director and second unit stuff on them. But he directed his first feature in 1996, which was a million miles away from everything else he directed. So in 1996, he directed Homeward Bound 2. Remember that? Can't say I do either, but fair enough. But it was his second feature that he directed for New Line Cinema that brought him onto the radar of Cellular. He directed Final Destination 2. Now, for my money, this remains the best Final Destination film. Came out in 2003. I think it's great. I really, really like it. He would go on to do another Final Destination film, 2009's The Final Destination. Spoiler, it wasn't the Final Destination. But Final Destination 2 was, I think it's an upgrade on the first film. And I like the first film as well. But New Line were happy and converted his deal there into a 2-picture deal. So by this point, Dean Devlin he got a relationship with New Line as well. He'd taken Cellular to them, and so these things were crossing over. There was a project that New Line was interested in making. There was a director finishing up Final Destination 2 that they needed another picture of, and so it landed in David R. Ellis's lap. And during the promotion of Final Destination 2, he was talking about how we hope to shoot this in September 2003. And they would shoot it, as it turned out, in September 2003. What's interesting about Cellular, for effectively a B movie really, is the strength of the cast of it as well. Because Ellis wanted Oscar winner Kim Basinger for the film and got her. I mean, the pair really quickly hit it off. And the part appealed to her as well. I mean, she would tell IGN, I loved the isolation that her character had. She said, I loved it. It was more like a play for me. And that's a challenge I've never done. It's one of my biggest fears to do a play. And maybe one day I will, because I love to face my fears. But I thought that was great. And she was really taken with it, not least because her character, I'm going really spoiler light, is in a single location for a good chunk of the film. And I mean, it's a testing role for her as well. William H. Macy signs up for a supporting role. You get Noah Emmerich as well in the midst. And then in comes this guy called Jason Statham. I've heard of him. So the Statham, at this point in his career, he'd broken through with Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. He'd broken through with Snatch. He'd just done in Europe the first Transporter film as well, and booked his first Hollywood role, which he'd shot, which was F. Gary Gray's The Italian Job remake. Not a bad film, but still a movie overshadowed by the fact that Edward Norton really didn't want to make it. That's a whole story and a half. In the case of this, he was signed up to play the villain in Cellular, and it would be, I think it's only his second Hollywood role. And so then there's like, who's the male lead of this going to be? We need ideally this young, relatively unknown to do it. Right, Not Another Teen Movie had put this guy called Chris Evans on the map. Remember him? And Chris Evans would say, I'd read this script probably a year prior to it getting made. I'd met with Dean Devlin on it. We got along great. And he said, like so many scripts in Los Angeles, it just kind of got put away for a while, got put on the shelf. And then Evans was away in New York doing something else. And they just said, well, hang on, Cellular's back around now. And this film is back up and running. So, I mean, you go through what Chris Evans was working on at the time. Not Another Teen Movie put him on the map in 2001. And then he shot things like Paperboy and The Perfect Score and The Orphan King before this came back around. And, I mean, he was clearly still on the radar for it. He booked the role. Now, this was, he just said, they called, I guess they'd been auditioning people. They narrowed it down to like 8 people they're going to test. They wanted me to be one of the 8. Chris Evans comes back, auditions, and he says he got lucky. So you've now got Kim Basinger, Chris Evans, Jason Statham, Noah Emmerich, William H. Macy. Evans throws himself into prep, actually. He did several weeks working at an LA stunt school for this. David R. Ellis, stunt background, liked the idea of his actors doing their own stunts. Certainly, that's right up Jason Statham Street as well. And September 2003, with a production budget of $25 million, it was going to be a California-based shoot, lots of Los Angeles, a lot of driving around. Now, Kim Basinger gave an interview to IGN again, actually, around the release of the film. And she talked about how there was an unlikely influence on it. And that would be a filmmaker by the name of Blake Edwards. Now, I grew up with a lot of Blake Edwards films, the Pink Panther movies, very, very special to me when I was growing up. But she'd worked with Blake Edwards in the 1987 film Blind Date. That was Bruce Willis's first movie role, starred opposite Kim Basinger. And Basinger said, Blake Edwards taught me something. He said, he loves slapstick. I got to be crazy in his films. I got to fall down, get up, and he loves all of that. And I knew I could do that by early on. And he was sort of my teacher. He let me do that. And she just said, you use the same kind of thing in this film. Such is the way of filming that her final shots were actually done on the first day of shooting. She's kidnapped, basically, in the movie right at the start, and then other things happen at the end. And it was a couple of weeks later before they shot the kidnapping. She'd already done the payoff and denouement by the time those scenes were shot. And you've got these two lead actors in the film, Chris Evans, Kim Basinger, who the amount they get the most screen time in the film, but barely any screen time together in it by nature of the structure of the movie. But Basinger liked this. I mean, she was really attracted to it and liked to be surprised too. She got on really well with David R. Ellis, and she just said, relay to Jason Statham that she wants to be surprised in moments in the film, because then that's easier for her to put across surprise to the audience. You know, she didn't want to know footsteps were about to be approaching behind her until they did. And that's how Ellis went about it as well. Chris Morgan was on set. He was rewriting a lot of this as he went along. It was just nips and tucks, I think. But, I mean, a fine experience for him that just been present and close to the production. And then it wraps up November 2003, New Line, by which point Final Destination 2 already a hit. New Line interested in getting David R. Ellis onto Final Destination 3. Didn't happen. He did something else. Come into that shortly. But the idea was, get this in cinemas September 2004. We could have a modest success on our hands, which is pretty much how it played out as well. So the box office will come to in a minute. The critical reviews of it were surprisingly, given as basically a B movie, really surprisingly good. That in particular, the work of David R. Ellis here is really strong. He keeps the excitement going. He keeps the chase going. He keeps the pacing of it's really good. It's not speed, is it? But he keeps the action. He keeps the action moving. He keeps the film moving. A 94-minute running time, edited sharply by Eric Sears. What a name for an editor that is, Eric Sears. Eric Shears, that's what you should be called. Gary Cappo shot it. John Ottman did the music for it, and it was a bunch of people who knew what they were doing, fine-tuning it, and a really good night out at the movies. I remember this at the time, a really good night out. And I mean, one of the people who was quite interested in it was Larry Cohen. Let's go back to him. I mean, talking to Screenwriters Utopia, he was asked about someone else, because Phone Booth went through in the end pretty much untouched. It was his script. Cellular was rewritten a lot. And Larry Cohen would say, this Chris Morgan is a very nice young man. He was on set every day doing rewrites, which is something I'd never do. He deserves credit, and he did a nice job. I'll come to exactly what he thought of the film in a minute. But in terms of the box office, this was a smart little hit for New Line Cinema. So it opens the weekend, September the 10th to the 12th, 2004. In the US. It opens opposite Resident Evil: Apocalypse with 23 million to its name. Cellular in second place with 10.6 million. That ain't bad, really, because 2004 is the DVD. 2004 is the DVD era, pretty much at its peak. That you just needed a modest success at the box office because you'd sell a ton of DVDs if you got the right film. New Line Cinema, which was putting it out, really put a lot of heft into its DVDs, made them very special, very collectible, put a lot of effort into the extra features. And so it knew it had a profitable movie here. Elsewhere in the top 10, what do we have? We had Without a Paddle at 3. The Brilliant Hero was at 4, actually. The Princess Diaries 2, Royal Engagement, that was at 5. Oh, God, I've forgotten they did this. Anacondas, The Hunt for the Blood Orchid at 6. Vanity Fair at 7. Paparazzi at 8. Collateral, what a film that is, at 9. Napoleon Dynamite at 10. I mean, what a time to be going to the movies. Week 2, nobody's really expecting Cellular to hold much of that business, but it sort of does. I mean, the word of mouth isn't bad. Compared to Resident Evil Apocalypse, which dropped 62% of its business on its second weekend, Cellular lost 34%, although it had like less to lose. So it sits in 5th place on its second weekend with 6.9 million. Top of the chart, Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow. There's a film. Mr. 3000 in second place. Anyone remember that? Okay. Resident Evil in 3rd, Wimbledon in 4th. And by week 3 for Cellular, I mean, it had done most of its box office business by this point. Down to 6th place, another 3.6 million in the bank. The Forgotten opens at the top of the chart. Shaun of the Dead opens in America that weekend as well. First Daughter is around in the top 10. And it's by week 4, it's 10th in the top 10. A Shark Tale, Ladder 49, Woman Thou Art Loosed, never seen it, also open up. By the time Cellular leaves US cinemas, a very tidy 32 million in the bank, 25 million outside the US for a $57 million worldwide gross. Not shabby at all. That, appreciating it would have just lost money on its theatrical release once you'd thrown in marketing, distribution costs and such like. New Line very much knew when it came to home entertainment, it was going to make a very tidy profit. Thank you very much, which is what happened. And in fact, here we are, 2026, and it's the kind of film that bubbles up to the top of Netflix charts fairly regularly as well. And you know what? Rightly so. For many people, it's an overlooked movie of the era, and it's a stepping stone for some of the people involved with it as well. But Cellular ultimately turned into something of a success. Now, Larry Cohen would reflect a screenwriter's utopia. He said, "It's not the picture I intended, but I think it's still a good picture." And he said, "It holds together well, and what I contributed to it provides the glue that holds the story together." He says, "The fun of these things is the twist, though, taking the audience down this road, then taking the thing in another direction. And like with Phone Booth, people wondered, how long can you keep that guy in the booth? Well, if you keep coming up with new twists to keep it, you keep coming up with the new twist to keep it interesting, which is ultimately what the film does. 94 minutes doesn't outstay its welcome. A tidy box office hit. Chris Evans, in the midst of this, would book the role in a superhero film. I wonder how that would turn out. Actually, it was in the first run of Fantastic Four movies, if you don't count the very early Fantastic Four movie. So for director Tim Story, he would start in 2 of those, and he was heading off to do that. New Line Cinema, meanwhile, it really liked being in the David R. Ellis business, and it had this other film on its books. Would he be interested in directing that? Turned out it would. He would. That film was Snakes on a Plane, and another slice of joyous pulp B-movie cinema. David Ellis, in the end, he would pass at the age of 60 in 2013. And I mean, he would go on to do films like Asylum, The Final Destination, Shark Night. He was just about to make the film Kite at the point that he passed. That, in the end, would be made in 2014 by Ralph Simon. And I don't know, filmmakers such as David R. Ellis are just underrated and underappreciated, really, because he gave me, really, 3-4 films, which I find an enormous amount of fun that I go back to fairly regularly. Cellular is the one that's fallen off a lot of people's radars. I really think it shouldn't. And that brings me to the end of this latest episode of Film Stories. As always, thank you so much for listening and thank you for your time. Social media stuff. Must remember to do that. So I'm on social media. It's true. Blue Sky, Simon Brew. Instagram, simon.brew. Film Stories on social media. Right then. Blue Sky, Film Stories. YouTube, Film Stories. Facebook, Film Stories Online. Instagram, Film Stories Magazine UK. We have an online store, store.filmstories.co.uk, where you can buy our magazines, our UK exclusive Blu-rays of No Way Out and Bull Durham. We've got unofficial movie merchandise in there as well. And then our clickbait and AI-free entertainment website is www.filmstories.co.uk. Most important thing, as always, is you all stay safe and well. You all look after yourselves. I will be back soon with another bunch of film stories. Until then, thanks, folks. Thanks for listening. Take care. Bye-bye. And the first post-credits bit of 2026. I think I've made a rod for my own back by doing these now, and I'm going to continue to do them for the foreseeable. This is actually the first new episode I've recorded in 2026. I think regular listeners will know it was a fairly brutal end of last year. My father passed in November. We did the funeral in December. I'm in the midst of sorting out my parents' home of 50 years now, which isn't an awful lot of fun, but also just a bit of sense of, and I don't begrudge a single minute of it, I really don't, of 18 months of feeling I have to be somewhere else and running around, and I really miss it, actually, is the weird paradoxical thing. But I also know that while I've got good health, and I don't take that for granted in the slightest, I need to get on and cause some mischief. So the week this goes out, hopefully I'm recording missing bits of the film that I'm in the midst of making, the Sylvester McCoy documentary, which some of you might know about. And I've got plans for things I've not done with film stories for the last year or two that I really, really need to get going on. But I kind of took Christmas because I thought by the time I got to Christmas, my head was okay, and I just took a bit of time to make sure I am okay, which sounds like really trite, really, doesn't it? But I had to be certain I was fairly level. I think I'm fairly level. There's mischief to cause. There's more live stuff I want to do. I'm sure I'll be boring you about that in due course. You all take care. Thank you so much to everyone who's supported me. I'm either going to pay it back or pay it forward. But right now, I'm going to go and have another coffee. Caffeine, folks, the gift from above.